I'm a grown woman and I'm well past needing my father to come save me, but even so, I wish you were here now. I guess I never realized before just how much he's always been there for me. Sometimes I wonder... Oh, wait. Let me start all this from the beginning. When I was 6 years old, I became obsessed with seeing the pirate show. I overheard a kid at school talking about it. He said it was a puppet show about a little girl who's friends with pirates, and it was on in the afternoon. Once I heard that, I had to see it. You know how little kids get obsessed with one particular thing for no reason? Well, for me, that thing was pirates. I'm still not sure why, but hey, I was 6. The boy did not want to tell me what channel it was on, but after I pestered him enough, he gave in. After school, I ran to the TV to wait out for 4 o'clock, but when the time came, nothing was there. The channel was just static. I flipped through all the stations looking for the show, but nothing. The next day, I accused the boy of making the whole thing up, but another girl in class said no, that the show was real. She'd seen it too. I asked her why I couldn't find it, and she didn't have an answer. The boy said I really shouldn't watch it anyway, but he wouldn't say why. And after that, he stopped talking to me at all. Every day at 4, I sat in front of the TV, hoping that the pirate show would magically appear. I even asked Dad to call the local affiliate and ask him about it. Dad would almost do anything for me, but they said they never heard of it. I was crushed. Months went by, the school year ended, and I became less zealous in my 4 o'clock vigil, but I would still check from time to time. One day, I went down to the basement where Dad kept the old black and white TV in his workroom. Back when I was young, I had the idea that different TV sets showed different shows, so I would always check both to see if I couldn't find it. It was on 4 o'clock, and I turned to channel 58, and just like always, but this time, something was different. I heard static, but underneath it, just barely there, I heard music. Strange, bouncy, Calliope music, and although the channel was still scrambled, I could just barely make out a picture. There, after all this time, was the pirate show. There was the little girl, and there were the pirate marionettes, and there was the ship with the talking figurehead. It was just like the kids at school described. Of course, the picture was a mess, and I could only hear half the dialogue, but I didn't care. I was ecstatic. I don't remember much about the program. It was half over by the time I turned it on. The only thing I do remember was the part with the little girl and the pirate are standing outside of a cave, and the ship tells them,
"You have to go inside."
just like that. I guess it doesn't sound like much, but at that moment, I became very scared, and I turned the TV off and almost ran out of the basement. Suddenly, I wasn't interested in that pirate show anymore. That should have been the end of it, and in fact, I'd like to think it was. I'd like to think that what happened next was all a dream or the product of a 6-year-old's imagination for most of the last 40 years. That's exactly what I've thought, but now I've started to wonder. That night, probably around 2 o'clock in the morning, I went to use the bathroom. I was never scared of the dark when I was a kid, and in fact, I was a little proud of how I felt brave enough to wander around our old, creaky house with no lights on. But on the way back, I noticed that the basement door was open, just a crack, and I heard something down in the basement. It was that strange, jumbled circus music from the show. It was still playing. I stood there for a long time, not sure what to do. I heard the music and the voices of the characters drifting in from the basement steps plain as day. They were very loud, and it was no more noisy static. I told myself that I simply left the television on, even though I knew I hadn't, and that Dad had somehow missed it before going to bed, even though I knew he never would. Yes, that would almost make sense. Except that didn't explain why a kid's show, which up till that afternoon seemed never to be on at all, would suddenly be on at 2 in the morning. I was, as I said, never a child afraid of the dark or much of anything else. So despite the strange circumstances, I resolved to go down and turn the old TV off and go back to bed. It didn't seem like a completely good idea, I'll admit, but I certainly wasn't going to run away from a television. I opened the basement door all the way and would probably have gone down, and not for the fact that at that very moment I prepared to move my little bare foot onto the first basement step, I heard that voice again.
You have to go inside.
But it did not sound like it was coming from the television. There are limits to what even the bravest 6-year-old will do, and I had just reached them, so I ran all the way to Dad's room and woke him up. He listened very calmly to my story, and when I was done, he picked me up and carried me with him to the basement door. There was no music now, and no voices, just darkness and silence. He set me down as he prepared to go downstairs. I wanted to stop him. I was sure all of a sudden that whatever was down there, I didn't want my daddy to be down there with it, but I couldn't think of anything to say, so I just watched him as he marched down those dark steps, one at a time. I had never been as frightened as I was for those few minutes that my father was down there in that basement. A part of me was certain he was never coming back. I even imagined that maybe something else would come back instead, but I wasn't sure what. Of course, he came back. He said that I had just left the TV on, just like I thought. I asked him what was on, and he said, nothing. Just that. Nothing. And then he tucked me back into bed and sang to me and stroked my hair until I fell asleep. I loved my father very much. After that, I more or less forgot about the whole thing. If it ever crossed my mind in years to come, I chalked it up to a nightmare. Dad never mentioned it either. There's one thing I noticed, though, that I never really thought about until tonight. Dad got rid of that old TV shortly after. In fact, he stopped watching television altogether, and he stopped working in the basement, too. After I went to college, he canceled the service and got rid of the other TV, and, as far as I know, never got another one. I wonder about that now. Just like I wonder about all those times as a little girl when I would catch my father staring off at nothing, with his head tilted to one side like he was listening to something. A song or voice that only he could hear. And had his voice quavered a little? And hadn't he been down there just a little longer than it should have taken to simply turn off a television set? I guess those are questions only my father could answer, and now he never will. Today was his funeral, and that's why, tonight, for the first time in 25 years, I'm sleeping in that old house again, alone. As they lowered his casket into the ground, the unwelcome image of him marching down those basement steps came back to me, and I shivered. This time, my father was down into the dark, alone. I was sure he would not come back. That was the first time in a long time I'd even thought about that pirate show, or the night in the basement. I preferred to not keep thinking about it, especially since I have so much else on my mind, but I'm afraid I don't have much choice. You see, when I came in tonight, the basement's door was open. I can hear music down there, and voices. Ones I hadn't heard since I was 6. And I'm sure if I open that basement door all the way and stand at the top of the stairs, I'll hear another voice telling me that I have to go inside. But I'm sure there's no television down there. I don't want to go. I want to run to my daddy's room and wake him up and have him sing me to sleep again, but of course I can't. I do not think it's a coincidence that this is happening the same day we buried him. I think somehow that this is something my father has been protecting me from a long time. Or maybe not. Maybe there's nothing staring in the basement 40 years ago, and maybe there's nothing down there now. Maybe it's just the stress of the funeral making me crack. They tell me grief can induce hallucinations. Sometimes. It could be there's nothing to be afraid of down there in the dark. I would like to very much think that's true. I guess once I go down and see, I'll know for sure. I guess if I don't come back, you'll all know too. Good night, Daddy. Sweet dreams. I love you.